To kick things off, we're going to be hearing from a few speakers about work that's happening in Lansing and the UP to more comprehensively address the housing needs that we talked about yesterday. As I mentioned yesterday, one of the challenges that we face is that development and home rehab have become prohibitively expensive, and there simply aren't enough funding resources or programs to offset those costs at a scale that meets our needs. Another challenge that we have is that local governments are limited in terms of what actions they can take to offset development costs or encourage new housing. And both of those issues really require action at the state level, which, as we know, can be a challenge in itself. But there's been a lot of advocacy on this front, and the state legislators and a big range of organizations are responding with a variety of proposals that will get us to some of the solutions that we talked about yesterday. So our panel today is going to share more detail about some of those proposals. We have with us today Luke Forrest from CEDM, the Community and Economic Development Association of Michigan, Marty Fatante from Invest UP, and Kent Wood from the Housing Michigan Coalition. So we're looking forward to the discussion today. We're really excited about some of these opportunities and want to make sure that you all are up to date on what's happening down in Lansing. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Luke to get started. Thank you for joining us today, Luke.
Thanks, Sarah. It's an honor to be on such a distinguished panel. First, I want to say a little bit about what CEDM is. We're a statewide advocacy and policy and membership organization. We have well over 300 organizations across the state that are working to build a stronger economy, but through a community-driven lens, really working at the grassroots. Lake Superior Community Partnership, we're proud to have them as a member, and I want to thank Sarah and her team for putting this event on. This is the kind of discussions we need more of across the state. So, like I said, Kent and Marty are experts in a lot of pieces of this. I see my role as really setting up some of the big picture. I'm going to quickly go through a lot of high-level things related to state and federal budget policy, and then turn it over to Marty and Kent to talk more specifics, and I'm happy to answer questions from anyone as we go. So Sarah called this my shock and awe slide. I just wanted to start out talking about the dollar figures and the scale of investment that we need in Michigan, because a lot of times I know personally, when I start seeing millions and billions thrown around, my brain kind of goes numb a little bit. It's really hard to contemplate because we don't deal with those dollar figures very often. But this is why we're talking about such huge dollar figures, because these are the needs in Michigan. So we're hearing from developers. A lot of our members are affordable housing developers, workforce housing developers. Because of the increase in workforce costs and materials costs across the country and really across the world, the gap between what you can make from building a housing unit and what it costs to build it is growing and growing. We're seeing now $150,000, $200,000 gap if you're trying to target middle and lower incomes per housing unit. So our latest estimates in Michigan statewide is that we need over 300,000 housing units to meet our current demand. And that's just for middle and lower income. So you do that quick math, we're talking about $45 billion that would be needed in terms of subsidy from some sources just to meet the current need and demand. That's not even assuming any population growth, which I know the Marquette region is seeing a lot of influx and interest from downstaters like me. So that's a little stage setting of why, when we say, oh, there's $100 million for a program, that's great, but we still have that $45 billion goal we've got to eventually get to over the next many years. There we go. Sorry, I was having a little trouble changing slides. So get on the right slide. So what are some possible solutions to that $45 billion problem? So we can create new state and local financing tools. Ken's going to talk about the Housing Michigan Coalition. We're a proud member of that, so I'm not going to steal his thunder. Their efforts are really trying to create some new tools to meet this need, but that probably won't be enough. Another option is local housing villages or trust funds. That's a growing trend. See here a few cities and counties in Michigan that have recently created ones. You can take money from the state general fund, which has been something we have done intermittently throughout the years, not at very high levels. But right now we do estimate there's potentially multi-billion-dollar surpluses we're looking at over the next couple fiscal years at the state level. So there's a lot of potential to use those dollars. And then what I'm going to talk about more is the last bullet here is the federal funds. So remember we passed Congress passed the American Rescue Plan way back in March. It was over $6 billion to the state itself, and then over $4 billion to the local governments distributed across the state. So, we're talking almost $11 billion of flexible funding to really tackle economic challenges. Most of that, to our knowledge, has gone unspent so far. So that's still available. And then there's the Build Back Better proposal, which has passed the House at the federal level. That has over $100 billion nationally for housing programs. A lot of that would come to Michigan if it does pass the Senate and get signed into law. So how are some other states using American Rescue Plan? You just have to make sure that it tackles the health, economic, or fiscal impacts of the pandemic. And it's quite easy to make the argument that housing does so. It's on the list here of a common use from other states, but also obviously public health services, food access, assistance to businesses have all been common uses, as well as education and internet investments. We support doing all of these things. We think there's enough to go around to make significant investments in a number of these areas. We have 11 states that haven't done anything with their dollars yet. We're not quite there. We're not at the bottom of the list, but we've only spent a pretty small percentage. Our neighboring state, Indiana, has already allocated 100% of the funds. And I want people to notice the range of states there: California, Indiana, Maine, Montana. This is not necessarily a partisan issue at a lot of the states. These are both Republican and Democratic controlled states have kind of gone ahead and take the plunge and been proactive. We do have to the end of 2024 to decide what to do with the dollars, but we feel like there's an urgency because housing construction takes so long that we really need to get started here. So these are some examples of how some other states have already made significant investments with their ARP funds. How's Michigan doing by comparison? We estimate we've only spent about 12% of that total available. Some of our neighbors are way ahead of us, as I already mentioned. Indiana's already spent over their 100% because they supplemented that with some other state funding. Wisconsin is up to 62%, Ohio 34%. So we feel like there's a lot of pressure because any investments you make in housing or community development, you're going to really draw from the materials, a limited supply of materials and labor, and you have limited construction seasons, as we know, in Michigan. So we really feel like we need to get started yesterday to keep up with our neighboring states and really make those investments that we talked about earlier. So we're part of a coalition called the Michigan Prosperity Roadmap. You can see our whole recommendations there at miroadmap.com. It's a really diverse coalition of state associations, some major employers, local governments. So out of that $6.5 billion, we recommend some pretty big chunks, like I said, for housing investments here at the bottom, $380 million. Also really that workforce and supply chain that I talked about to bring down the cost of doing housing in an affordable way. $425 million for that. And then additional economic development incentives, $380 million to help with the job growth that we need. Again, those are huge numbers, kind of boggle my mind, but you add those three up, you're still talking about less than 20% of what the state was allocated overall. And that's not even touching all the dollars that the local governments have, which we think should be matched with the state as much as possible. So that's a little bit of the big picture. I also mentioned Build Back Better. We can go into this if people have questions. It's just a proposal now. It's sitting in the US Senate. So I don't want to get too much into it, but I think the key message is there's a lot of important investments in this bill, potentially, including some tax credits to help with the development of housing. But I think the existence of that bill and the possibility of it passing should really just be an additional reason to have some urgency around spending the money we do have in hand. Because if we can't even figure out the $6 billion, what's going to happen when that doubles or triples with the passage of Build Back Better potentially coming? So I hope I gave you a good overview of what some of the options are that we have in front of us as a state. And I want to pass it back to Sarah, because I think Marty's going to talk about some more specifics through the lens of the UP.
Thank you, Luke. It's really helpful to see all those numbers in one place because there's a lot of them. And like you said, it's kind of mind-boggling, but there's a lot of opportunity and hopefully we can organize effectively to take advantage of that. And that's one of the things that we've asked Marty to talk about. Marty Fatante from Invest UP has been a really vocal advocate for a lot of these issues in the UP. And I'm going to turn it over to Marty to talk about where we are regionally. Thanks, Marty, for joining us today.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for convening this conversation. Absolutely the most important issue, I think, before us in the Upper Peninsula. It's important for us as an organization. So just a bit of background, we're a regional economic development organization that looks to drive prosperity across all 15 of the Upper Peninsula counties. And for us, the defining metric really at this point is population, and more specifically population loss. And just to give some context as to why that's so important, for those that have heard me speak in the recent past, this will be a bit of a repeat, but it's important to understand how important this issue is for us in the Upper Peninsula. We continue to hemorrhage population, and of the 6 counties that lost the most population in the last census, 5 of those are located in the Upper Peninsula. The UP in the last census lost some 3% of its population, while the state gained population overall, as did the nation. And one statistic I think is particularly compelling. It shows not only why we should be concerned from the health of the Upper Peninsula in general, but it also evidences some of what we've lost from a revenue standpoint and some of what lies ahead of us. And that's what's happened to us with our K-12 population. So since 1970, the Upper Peninsula has lost 48% of its K-12 population. And I think even more alarming than that, in just the last 20 years, we've lost 26% of our K-12 population. And certainly there are reasons for that outside of just loss of industry that results in loss of population, such as birth rate and homeschooling. But overall, that's something that should definitely alarm us. And so what we've set to try to help turn that, or at least stem that loss, are some priorities, and really appreciate our local partners. Like the Lake Superior Community Partnership, who does such a good job on advocating for these issues as well, and keeping a focus on them. And that's housing, childcare, regional air service, and broadband. And we're fortunate that the federal government, the state government, has provided significant investment into childcare. $1.4 billion has been invested there in the last state budget. And then broadband, of course, has received a significant influx of funding as well through the RDOF. And in fact, the first customers through that build out with Highline and AEG are now receiving internet service in Delta County, and that'll continue to grow. So to us, that leaves the priority issue before us, really housing. And we received some affirmation as to how important that is from a poll that we recently conducted that we will release publicly soon. And one of the really interesting things that we learned from that poll, which was a poll of 30 questions, sampling the opinions of 500, which is a good sample size, opinions from Upper Peninsula residents, is that the age demographic that's actually most optimistic about the future of the Upper Peninsula is actually the youngest demographic that was surveyed, and that was, I think, 18 to 25. And what it suggested, because there's a precipitous decline then in the age demographics that follow, is that there's kind of this honeymoon period. And in part with the university students that we're really blessed to have. And so it's suggested to us is, what do you need to do to ensure that that age group, those who are in their first job, are really anchored here? And what that same poll proved out is one of the top of mind concerns for that age group was available housing. And so that's why we really appreciate groups like CDM and what Luke and his team are doing to advocate this from a broad general policy standpoint. It's something that we certainly support, and from our perspective, it's trying to find a number of solutions that work well in tandem. So we have a number of advocates like CDAM on the state level that are advocating for state housing programming, and that's really important. From our perspective, though, we have a concern, and that concern is that at times state programming doesn't seem to be well designed for our needs in the Upper Peninsula. And so although you see Luke's number and what they propose as a coalition to help on the housing side and to help on the economic development side, and that's certainly a healthy number, at the end of the day, what does that mean for real opportunity in the Upper Peninsula? And I think one of the things that the pandemic allowed us to show as a region, not as an organization, but as a region, and the different economic development stakeholders in their ability to collaborate and partner, was that we can do a really good job of tackling and addressing Upper Peninsula centric challenges. And the state entrusted some $7 million to the Upper Peninsula to get out and socialize for the small business community in the midst of the pandemic through a few different grants. And the economic development community came together, and I'm really proud to say, worked tirelessly to push that money out to small businesses and really made a difference that I think allowed us to help. Certainly, great challenges in front of many small businesses yet, but really helped keep many of them in their head above water. And so that's really the premise of what we've been actively promoting with both the legislature and the administration, is a solution that's really Upper Peninsula led. And we think that's necessary in part because the housing challenge in the Upper Peninsula is a bit different than it is in other areas. So it heightens that concern that I just talked about. And we convened a stakeholder group this summer. Lake Superior Community Partnership was an active partner in that. And Sarah, as you likely know, brings in some really, I think, unmatched housing expertise that was helpful to that conversation. But we brought in developers, we brought in local community leaders, and we brought in lending institutions to talk about what our challenges look like and what some solutions might look like. And we heard three things really that I think differentiate what the challenges are with housing in the Upper Peninsula versus other parts of the state. And the first is that local lending institutions face higher risk here than elsewhere because of some of the issues that we have, like seasonality, availability of workforce, cost of labor, and cost of materials. And so that makes it difficult to de-risk projects. The second thing that we learned was that there's a relative lack of opportunity in the Upper Peninsula compared to other more metropolitan areas through the Community Reinvestment Act. And that's a federal requirement that in metropolitan areas where banks have a large physical presence, they need to comply with this act. And that can, through their need to comply, drive competitive terms for financing. And then lastly, there's a lack of foundational partnerships or beneficial wealth that can help with some contribution for projects like this. And you may have seen the news recently where Kalamazoo, to their credit, had another $500 million that high net worth individuals in that area came together to pool to help their community and help with economic development. And so it's for those reasons that we really believe part of the answer here in the Upper Peninsula, and not just for housing, but that would be where we would start with the focus. But for some of the other issues that are in front of us, like blight, we think we have a real need with some workforce training issues. And then additionally, we see some real opportunity with some promotional outreach in light of what we've seen with tourism traffic. So those would be some of the priorities, but it would start and stop with housing for what we would propose. And in short, that's a regional transformation fund. And we've proposed both as an organization and in partnership with economic development organizations, the private sector across the Upper Peninsula, that the state invest $50 million into a fund that allows us to decide how to address these challenges. And so that certainly sounds, again, to kind of follow on Luke's heels, like a lot of money, and it certainly is. And from our perspective, it certainly wouldn't solve all of these problems, but it would be a difference maker. It would be transformational. And in light of the money that the state's sitting on, it's I think attainable. In fact, I'm in Lansing yet today. I've been here Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, again advocating for this proposal. And the basis for the 50 million is really, there's rationale for it. It's twofold. So first, the state received $11 billion in American Rescue Plan funding last year. It pushed out 4.4 billion of that money quite quickly to our local units of government, so cities, townships, and counties. The Upper Peninsula, had it received a proportional share based upon its population, would have received actually another $44 million. And I don't suggest that population was necessarily the right way, but it certainly would have been a fair way to distribute that money. Instead, we received about 1.9% of that funding across the Upper Peninsula. So is the state sitting on additional ARP funding and the state sitting on some unrestricted money that is resulted by virtue of a budget surplus? And I've lost track a bit, but I think it's still in the neighborhood of about $10 to $11 billion. There's certainly ample opportunity to fund, capitalize this fund with that type of money. And the other basis for that amount of money is found to our neighbors to the south in Indiana. And Indiana has done exactly this, and that is they've put $50 million into 10 economic development regions. Indiana and Michigan both divide their state into 10 regions for economic development purposes. And Indiana capitalized a program there to allow their regions autonomy to decide what to do with $50 million. So this is the basis that we've gone to legislators and the governor to say, this makes a lot of sense. I don't for a minute suggest that other areas of the state, other regions don't have their own sets of challenges. And we certainly don't suggest that we should be treated differently in that respect. And if other regions believe this is the approach for them, we certainly would welcome legislators in the administration to take a look at that. And in fact, the governor has proposed just that. So Governor Whitmer, as you may know, has proposed a My New Economy plan. And there's a number of what we would believe as an organization, really good policy proposals within it. We support a good share of what the governor proposes in that plan. And we expect as this process moves forward that there will be some reconciliation between what the governor's proposed through that plan and what the legislature will propose as its priorities. But the governor in that plan proposes $250 million for regional development and regional priorities. So it's part of the way there from our perspective. If you were to push out $50 million to the 10 regions, you're about halfway there. So we think that's a great start, and we think it helps move the dialogue in the right direction. The concern for us, though, with the bit of detail that's been released on that plan is twofold. One, it would essentially concentrate the programming within the State Department. And so we think, again, the concern from a regional perspective should be, will that programming, even though intended for regional purposes, provide us the opportunity that it needs for us to address those issues, rather than entrust us locally to be the decision maker. And just to clarify, when I say locally to be the decision maker, I certainly don't mean that to be me, nor InvestUP. It would be a collaborative effort that would, I think from our perspective, look in some ways like the work that we did with the Restart and Relief Grant. It would need to look, I think, for process purposes different to some degree, but the commonality would be, We want to be collaborative across the Upper Peninsula and make sure that there's a voice, an active voice that represents each of the areas, because as you well know, the Upper Peninsula has its own different nuanced strengths and challenges as well. And the second challenge or concern with the governor's proposal is how that money's allocated. So it talks about 250 million in total, but it doesn't suggest how that money will be divided. So is it divided equally, or the bigger concern is it divided by virtue of our population? In which case we'd get some $7 million or so. And $7 million is certainly a significant amount of money, but at the end of the day, it's not transformational. So for us really to get there and address a significant and profound problem like we have in the Upper Peninsula with housing, it has to be something more significant than that. And just to give you one data point about maybe why the challenge in the Upper Peninsula is so great, one of the things we've been trying to do at InvestUP is also use data to help inform decisions. And one of the things that we discerned in that process of looking at relevant data is since 1990, building permits for new housing units in the Upper Peninsula is actually down 60%. So compared to where we were and what we were building in just 1990, we've lost 60% of the applications for building permits. So it gives you some insight into the challenge presently because of what's been going on for the past 30 years, and emphasizes, I think, why this is so important. So I can say it's really hard, I think, to describe how legislative and administrative conversations go as you try to advance an initiative like this. Because at the end of the day, there's nothing concrete to really evidence progress. Just a bit of background about myself. I had the good fortune of working on staff in the legislature for 14 years and was fortunate to be a very small part of 118 public acts, bills that were signed into law. And the thing that you learn through that is there is some science to how to advance an initiative like this, but largely it's an art, and it's driven in part by trying to move, hopefully, good, sound ideas through relationships. And what I can tell you in being down here in the last 2 days, which is on the heels of conversations which started some 6 months ago on this, is that we're still in the game, and that's important. So of all the conversations we have, and this week I've met with a good dozen legislators, members of the administration, and most importantly, the new state budget director, is I think people understand it, and no one has said no. And I think the conversation that we had with Chris Harkins, the new state budget director, was this is the type of thing very broadly that we're looking for. So certainly no commitment, but I think the thing that they're finding is so much of what they are being asked to fund right now with this incredible amount of money is contrary to what Luke put forward. And that is they're being asked to fund projects. So all these one-offs. And so what Luke has proposed with CDAM and what we're proposing here, and what my message has been to Upper Peninsula legislators, who incidentally have all been really supportive and active. And in fact, yesterday, Representative Marquette got the Senate, the House floor leader directly involved. So Ben Frederick was kind enough to actively look at this yesterday. But I lost my train of thought here. I'm sorry. So what we've been trying to make sure the messages from our legislators is everyone will have projects that are worthwhile and deserve consideration that they will want funded. So all 148 legislators will have pieces that are important to them, but we need to separate the focus of projects from programs. And what Luke has suggested and what we're suggesting is we need equity on the programming side. And so we're going to continue to fight. What I'm hearing right now, in meeting with Senator Ken Horn on Tuesday, who's the Senate chair of all that's economic development, is they're looking at housing now in January. And so I hope that proves to be true. And I also hope then that a piece like this could be a part of that. Up until just last week, I think there was traction on moving an economic development bill before the year end. And then the Ford decision where it moved operations to Tennessee and Kentucky on the electronic vehicle side really changed the dialogue here. And so as you may have read last night, the legislature, the House took up 3 bills yesterday to try and ensure that there's not a repeat performance with another significant employer like Ford driving operations to another state. And so that slowed the conversation down. But we're going to continue to push, and I really appreciate the partnership that we have with those that are partnering with us. And if this is an initiative that makes sense to you and you think has opportunity in it for the Upper Peninsula, we certainly welcome you reaching out and making your voice heard to state legislators and the governor as well. I'm hopeful that together we can get there. So glad to take questions and concerns. I unfortunately have a 10 o'clock with a legislator here, so I have to jump off at 10, but we'll be here up until that time to answer any questions.
Thank you, Marty. We really appreciate your advocacy for us in Lansing, and know that this is a really critical time to be talking with legislators. If there are any questions for Marty before we move on to Kent's presentation, we can take those now just because he does have to do actual policy work in Lansing today. But he mentioned having the power of multiple voices speaking to our legislators. Marty, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, but one of the questions we have for all panelists is how and when stakeholders in our audience could get involved. And what I'm hearing is now is the time. Are there any particular talking points or resources that you might want to point people towards if they'd like to contact our legislators on this issue?
You know, that's an interesting point, Sarah. I hadn't thought of putting talking points together that could be circulated and could certainly do that. I think what's most important, though, is just to make your voice heard. One of the things that we are really fortunate to have in the Upper Peninsula is accessible legislators and accessible staff. And so the message really doesn't need to be any more simple than we need a housing solution. We need you to engage on it. And we think a part of that solution is what CDAM's proposing and what UP Economic Development Community is proposing with regard to a regional transformation fund. That alone is enough. It helps to embolden legislators. It helps to energize legislators. My message to the UP delegation at dinner Tuesday night was, opportunities like this don't happen unless they have champions. And I know that they have an awful lot in front of them, but we need champions. And so hearing just with a message that simple from a broad variety of individuals and stakeholders across the Upper Peninsula does help to energize them to be that champion.
Okay, thank you, Marty. We're gonna turn it over to Kent now. He's gonna talk about the Housing Michigan Coalition, which has a package of bills that has been moving along over the last year or two. Kent is working with a group called the Housing Michigan Coalition, which is a pretty broad group with stakeholders from different sectors that all recognize the importance of housing and the need for locals to find solutions to some of those problems. So Kent, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Sarah. Appreciate it. I kind of consider this the unenviable position of going after Luke and Marty, two well-respected gentlemen in their field. But I did want to chat about some specific items also that are happening in front of the state legislature as it pertains to housing. Let's see here. I'm guessing. There we go. Hopefully everybody can see that now. So like Sarah mentioned, I am representing a broad coalition across the state called Housing Michigan. I happen to work for a nonprofit called Housing North, which Sarah is very familiar with and represents 10 counties in Northwest Lower Michigan. Back with Sarah, had the opportunity to start to work with a group. We knew that there was a dozen or so organizations and folks that were trying to work on housing legislation within the state.
And if I could interrupt you, please. Sorry about this, but we can only see a blank screen.
All right. How's that? Is that better?
There we go. Thank you.
Okay, good. About a year ago now, a group did come together to try to figure out what are, even if it was just a handful of items, could we really push through in a relatively short amount of time with a broad group of support to really start the ball rolling on specific items, specific tools, and in developing a more broad toolbox, not just for the state of Michigan, but I think, largely for the communities that are within the state of Michigan, many of whom are trying to take active roles in housing development in their communities, but are kind of running up a wall when it comes to things that they can do, ways that they can finance projects, and tools that they have at their disposal. So this group kind of came together around these three common principles that you see on your screen there. I think first and foremost, it was really important that as much as possible that these tools allow for local control. And when I say that, I mean allowing local units of government and local developers and employers, nonprofits, you name it, to be able to come together and have the latitude to kind of hash out tools that work for their community, and not be stuck in a box where the numbers or the benchmarks or the funding benchmarks just don't align with what their community can put forward. So local control and flexibility was a huge thing. And then, really kind of targeting, of course, workforce housing, and really kind of primarily that space in between, 50 and 120% of area median income, as you can see right here. Also wanted to make sure that we had tools, again, as I kind of referenced earlier, that were available or usable for the number of stakeholders that are involved or can be involved in developing affordable and workforce housing. So of course that includes your large statewide developers, your small local developers, your local units of government from townships and cities on up to counties, nonprofits, of course, our employers, who are more and more starting to be vocal and starting to want to put actual dollars into these solutions, and then property owners that are out there as well. So what we landed on for the time being was a package of 6 bills right now, and that again try to get the ball rolling in terms of a toolbox that locals can use and is accessible to them for housing development. I'm just going to kind of fly over the broad view of this for you all, and if you are interested in diving in further, we can always chat later, or I've also got there will be a link to or the address to the coalition's website, which I think is I think they've done, folks who are handling that have done a good job of keeping the information very current that's on there. So So not only the bill drafts, but also what we're looking at in terms of any changes to those bills, that's on there for you to look at as well, talking points and all that. So these first two here are really very similar to each other. Senator Winnie Brinks from Grand Rapids, a Democrat, Senator Ken Horn, who was referenced earlier, from the Frankenmuth-Saginaw area, a Republican. Both of these bills really are kind of modeled after the industrial facilities exemption. So an existing program that is out there for industrial facilities and industrial sites, now just kind of taking that framework and being able to use that for housing and for residential facilities. The idea here is that local governments can create a district as large or small as they want it to, and negotiate up to a 50% tax credit on that property for residential facilities or rehabilitation opportunities also. Senator Brinks's bill is, I think kind of 5 and below, or developments that would be kind of those smaller number of units, and then Senator Horns would allow for some of those larger units, so 5 units and above. Another thing we're looking at is that Senator Schmidt, a Republican from Traverse City, is the ability for local units of government and developers to work directly together on a payment in lieu of taxes agreement without the requirement that the developer be looking for a state or be using a state or federal program or tax credit. Right now, by and large, there are a number of pilot agreements out there. Typically, though, those are in, the developer will be going through or competing for a MSHDA program, and go to the local unit of government for that pilot to make their application look better in the eyes of MSHDA. The problem is when that application does not get accepted, and so that that project doesn't get the go ahead from MSHDA, these pilot agreements aren't in effect then, in essence. So this would allow for that, again, that local unit of government and that local developer to just work directly together. We know of a lot of communities across the state that have said, like, we've got a project here, like, we are willing to work with these developers, but for the legal ability to do so. And so that's what that is trying to accomplish there, Senator Schmidt's bill. And then Senator Moss, a Democrat from the Dearborn area, is looking to expand the ability to use an existing program called Neighborhood Enterprise Zones, or NEZs, to all cities, townships, and villages as well. And then finally, a two-bill portion here from Senator Victory, who's a Republican from kind of the metro Grand Rapids area in West Michigan. This is based on a program that is in Illinois, and actually it was our own Sarah Lucas here that that I think kind of discovered this, or at least brought this to my attention. And so what we're looking at is just a way to incentivize employers to contribute dollars and resources to housing. So this would allow them a tax credit of up to 50% of an amount that they direct towards their employees' housing. And that the idea is that could be anywhere along the spectrum from, some money for, for rent assistance or down payment assistance, up to money that they're putting into rehabilitating an existing building or developing a new building. So kind of anywhere along that spectrum, large or small. This this package continues to be very fluid right now. The bills were introduced back in April of this past year. They made it through the Senate at the end of June, or maybe that was September, I want to say. So kind of in a relatively short amount of time, we're able to get these through the Senate. Since then we have been working with Treasury, with MISTA, with the administration on a number of changes to these bills that they wanted to see, and are right now in the process of trying to get a hearing in the House Local Government Committee. I will say that, unfortunately, we found out yesterday that we are going to miss our internal deadline of having these done by the end of this year, by the end of this calendar year. Yesterday was the last day that these could have come up in committee, and they did not. We know also that the administration does have some concerns or questions that they want to work out, specifically on Senator Horn's bill here, the residential facilities exemption, and also this employer housing tax credit. So just based on our conversations yesterday, we're feeling pretty confident that the three bills, the pilot, neighborhood enterprise zone, and then this the Brinks bill, the Attainable Housing and Rehab Act, that we've got the consensus, and we'll move forward with that in January once the legislature gets back. And we'll use this time now over the holidays and while the legislature's gone, to continue to work with the administration on the employer housing tax credit and the Horn bill. So in conclusion, if you want to stay up to date, there is the address to the webpage, the Housing Michigan, webpage there, which quite simply is just kind of a warehouse for, some of the talking points. You can sign up for regular email updates, and also take a look at the bill drafts and kind of where they're at in the process as well. So as Luke referenced earlier, these are not a silver bullet, and I think we knew that going into it. There is no silver bullet, unfortunately, for housing, and so that's why you've got kind of work on different prongs of the trident, if you will. Tools for locals. CEDM's work around kind of the bigger, and I know MML and CEDM and a number of others are working on kind of the bigger conversation about funding and ARPA dollars, down to ways to find out how we can get local funds for housing and economic development that that are more controlled and influenced by locals or by regions. So, we do fully anticipate that once we are hopefully finished with this 6-bill package, we know that there's phase 2 and phase 3, ready to go. We've already been talking about a number of other ideas and bills that are out there that we could, kind of use the Housing Michigan umbrella and the 100 or so organizations across the state that are part of the coalition or part of just these efforts to get housing tools. We were again really hoping that this first step right here was, we could find a way for a lot of different organizations and sometimes some very competing organizations. If you look at everything from my client Housing North, which is a nonprofit, to MML and CEDM, and the home builders, which are larger statewide organizations, to the Grand Rapids Chamber and business and economic development groups, to the Realtors Association. So it was very important for us to find things that everybody could really push together on, and develop some momentum, develop some trust, not only in working together but working with the legislature. And I think even these hiccups coming up with a couple of these bills will allow us an opportunity to speak more directly with key staff in the administration to, again, I think, clearly state what we're trying to do and build that trust with them. Because at the end of the day, I think, as was referenced earlier in Luke's presentation, the funding stuff is not partisan, and neither are housing tools. I think you can see that from the bill sponsors that are, not only across the aisle, but some very conservative folks like Senator Victory, and some very liberal and progressive folks like Senator Moss can all agree, we need more tools in this state. And so, more is to come on this, but this is, certainly at least 6 that we've got cooking right now that are kind of, I think hopefully nearing the finish line, at least with 3 of those as we get into January. And then, more to come as we start to get into 2022 and an election year. So I do encourage you, if you do want some more information or want to sign up for regular updates, visit that address right there, housingmichigan.weebly.com. Or, I'm happy to have a conversation with you at any time about this. So thank you, Sarah, for this opportunity, and for, Luke and Marty, the ability to be on this panel with you.
Thank you, Kent. I really appreciate that. I think, in Luke's conversation about Housing Michigan, one of the really big wins of that group, in my opinion, is it really elevated the topic of housing in the legislature. I think that people really sat up and paid attention when they saw all of those diverse interests that Kent mentioned coming together around this particular issue. So bills aside, I think it's been really positive for this conversation, and kind of paved the way for these other discussions about how we might be able to use federal dollars around housing programs. So there's been some great discussion in the chat, and Luke, I appreciate you answering those questions. I'll do one last plug for Marty here if you have any questions for him before he has to take off in a few minutes. I noticed there's been a lot of questions about short-term rental bills, but before we get into that, because I know that that's a big discussion, just wondered if any of the panelists had any thoughts on some of the comments about getting traction in the legislature, who might be some of the opposition, and who are some of the organizations, I guess, that are working in step with us on these issues to support action on the housing funds and bills.
Before Marty goes, I'd love to hear his take. I put my attempt to Jennifer's question about why the delay of appropriating funds compared to some of the other states. But Marty and Kent, you're more well connected in legislative circles than I am. I'm curious to hear your take on that question.
So it was described to me just last night as this question was raised, that there's almost a paralysis because there's so much money, it's overwhelming, and they don't know where to go with it. And so I think part of it got slowed down. So there was certainly the legislature and the governor were having difficulty communicating, I think, before Budget Director Masteron came on. And I think he changed the dynamics of the conversation. And you saw the 21-22 budget move really well, I think, because of the relationships that he was able to make on behalf of the governor with legislative leaders. When he left to go to Wayne State, there's of course a pause. Chris Harkins, who's really well respected in Capitol circles, is now settling in. He's got great credibility with the legislature. I think it was a great hire by the governor. So I think that's also part of it, is Chris is trying to get his feet under him. But I think at the end of the day, the description that was offered to me last night is it's really difficult to understand maybe how all of this comes together and what you do with it. There does seem to be a concerted effort in the circles I'm talking that they want transformational uses of this money. And so what does that mean at the end of the day? And I think you saw part of that with this package that moved yesterday, but that would be the answer I would offer you, Luke.
Yeah, and I would just offer that, I think, yeah, there is a lot of, and I think is kind of, both Luke and Marty referenced, there is that issue where you've got Republican legislature, Democratic governor, you've got an election year coming up next year, you've got the, redistricting that is just throwing everybody up in the air. So you definitely do have, some pettiness and some partisan stuff. I also feel like, though, that there is a very sincere conundrum that they're trying to figure out between, speed of getting this dollars out and, like Marty referenced, trying to do something transformational. And so if you want to do something transformational, you gotta kind of think it through, knowing that, these are supposedly one-time dollars. And so you're not going to get a continuing stream here, where it's like, well, that doesn't work, we'll just, we'll try something else. So I do think that there is also, at least some, some good, sincere, healthy, trying to figure out how to balance those two. Again, that kind of catch-22 between knowing that there's a need right now or yesterday, as Luke said, with, hey, this is one shot at this. How do we really be transformational with it?
Okay, thanks, guys. There's a comment here that most suggested legislative fixes are to allow city taxes to be used in various forms to support housing construction, the greater need being state and federal dollars rather than beggaring the locals. I'd ask if any of you have any responses to that. I guess I would just like to add some commentary in that all of the conversations I have at the state level, there is a very clear concern that they're being asked to shoulder the full burden of the problem in some cases, and really want to see local buy-in and local participation. And in fact, this is something that has come up with the federal bills that were mentioned. Housing was a big part of the original infrastructure bill, and a lot of the thinking was that funding would be tied to local commitment to housing at some level, and what that commitment looks like, it's not abundantly clear, but there is a very strong sentiment, at least in my experience, that the state and feds are looking for locals to be a part of the solution if they're going to be providing dollars to the issue. Kent and Luke, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I'll go first. I'm sure Luke will have some comments too, but it's all of the above. Again, this is, at the very least a trident here, if not more of a fork, in that, yes, we certainly need more resources from the state and from the feds. We need those resources to be as flexible as possible, because, again, back to Marty's point earlier, a lot of times with the programs that exist right now, it has been harder for smaller communities and rural communities to participate in those. And I know that's something that, when I was working in a chamber, and I know Sarah and Luke, you folks probably hear that all the time. You get your ears filled with that all the time. It's like, one size does not fit all. We need to figure out a way that smaller communities can use this. So there's that part of it. We've also got a lot of locals that are just begging for more tools, and that are saying, we've got some ability to limit our taxes right now in order to really get housing development going in our communities. And then again, other stakeholders like foundations and nonprofits and employers, finding a way for them to really participate and incentivize their participation in these developments, especially when it comes down to covering gaps that exist in development. So it's not wrong in that, yes, a lot of these are aimed at locals and kind of our on the locals dime. But that was by design though, because we don't have a lot of that right now. And that's what we were hearing out there is was needed more of, but we certainly, need more commitment from the state, from the federal government, and more commitment from, again, those other stakeholders in the communities, like employers, like your school districts and your hospitals that are, certainly have their own issues and in things that they're working on, but have also been, Sarah, you can probably attest, sometimes some of the loudest at the table saying, what are you doing to help us get housing for our teachers or our doctors or our nurses? And so, it's unfortunately not as easy as saying, well, if only the state would chip in more, if only the locals would chip in more, or employers got to start paying more. It's going to take a lot of different tools.
I don't have anything to add. Kent nailed it. I mean, that's why I started my slides out with, we probably need all of the above, because you're not going to get to, I just did the math. I think if my $45 billion figure is right, that's 280 million just in the county of Marquette, right? So like, you're not going to get to that number with one tool. Probably need 5 or 6 or 10.
Okay, thanks for that, guys. I want to just make a note here that we will be offering a roundtable discussion where you don't have to submit your comments over chat. You can actually be a part of the discussion. We'll be providing a link to that. It will begin at 11:30 after our next presentation from Marilyn Crowley. So check the chat for the link to the roundtable at 11:30, and I think you'll also be getting an email. So if we run out of time here, we're scheduled to end at 10:15. We'll pick it back up again at 11:30. So with that, there were several questions about short-term rentals. And I don't know if Kent or if Luke would like to just give a quick update on where we are with that, understanding that there's the potential for it to have an impact on the housing market. Also understanding that it's a giant can of worms that we could spend all day talking about. So Kent, I'll start with you, and Luke, if you have anything to add, feel free.
Oh man, I was going to kick it over to Luke first, and because I know that there's so much out, there's so many bills out there on this, and so many ideas, that I know just enough to get myself in trouble with it, but this is something, and again, I need to make it very clear here that the Housing Michigan Coalition, who I'm kind of speaking on behalf of today, does not have a position on this. My client, Housing North, certainly does have a kind of a nuanced position on it. On the one hand, they've seen in the raw numbers what kind of effect that short-term rentals can have in terms of number of units that are available in a community for long-term rentals, and especially in smaller communities, if you're only adding 5 to 10 units, rental units or housing units per year, but you've got 20 to 30 that are existing units that are kind of being turned over to short term. That's a number deficiency that is an issue, while also realizing that again, especially for smaller communities, and especially ones that do not have a lot of hotels or larger hotel chains, that's oftentimes a big part of, if not the only solution that you have for kind of the short term, or for tourists, which are still a big part of, when you look at Northern Michigan, tourism and recreation is still a major part of the economy up here. I think that goes for the UP also. So it is certainly, it's a tough balance for smaller communities, for rural communities, right now, and I certainly don't pretend to have the answer on it. But Luke might have more of an update on where things are, especially with I think it's 4722. That's kind of been the big one that's kind of taken everybody by storm. But I know that there's a number of other bills that have been introduced out there or are being worked on and might be introduced shortly here that are trying to fix different parts of this as well.
As I mentioned in the chat, we've been opposed to 4722, really because you're taking completely away the ability of the local government to regulate these, which we think is overreach and just a bad precedent setting, because a lot of our local planning, local economic development, community development is sort of predicated on that idea of local decision making around regulating land use. So we think it's a real slippery slope issue. My understanding is it's no news on it potentially being acted on in the Senate. I believe the supporters are just trying to line up that majority in the state Senate to get it passed. And a lot of the advocates like us are arguing that there are better solutions here. I do think we probably need a better handle, going back to the underlying housing issue. Sarah, I don't know if anyone in your region or in Northern Lower Peninsula has done this, but I think it'd be important to get a better handle on how much housing supply is being stripped out of the market by the short-term rentals, because we hear some anecdotes about that, but I don't know. I haven't seen really good data, because I think that would be a really strong argument, frankly, for taking more action at the state level. Like if we're losing 20% of the housing market in downtown Marquette to short-term rentals, which I've seen some anecdotes from other communities like that, that's a really good argument for making more investments in supply.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add to, Luke, that I know that's what started to get Housing North a little bit more involved in this discussion was some data that they got from, I can't remember if it was East Jordan or Boyne or, someplace in Charlevoix County, that showed, I forget if it was last year or 2019, but, they had sort of, I think 25 to 30 new short-term rentals that have been applied for, and I think 5 housing units that had been developed within that year. So again, that's one community, but certainly for that community, I think alarm bells started going off, and I know it's been a challenge too right now for local units of government, counties and cities that are actively looking at participating in housing projects right now are concerned that they're just going to be spinning their wheels. If you add, you give away a tax incentive for 15, 20 unit development, but you've got 20 to 30 or 40 short-term rentals continuing to come onto the market, that you're not actually closing that gap in that long-term affordable housing. So anyway, I just say that as a reason why I know my client Housing North started to really get more engaged in this issue and hopeful for finding a solution to it.
And that spinning the wheels metaphor that Kenny used, I just want to throw in one of my favorite stats that really changed my mind as you all are thinking about housing concerns. Keep in mind the shrinking households that we have in Michigan, especially, but across the United States of America. I think that goes underplayed in a lot of people's heads. It's another reason why it feels like we're falling behind, even though there is new housing being built. For most of the 20th century, we averaged like 4 people per household in Michigan, and we're rapidly going down to about 2. And I think with the last numbers I saw, we're 2.2 average people per household. So you just think about that. If you have the same population, you need twice the housing units.
I know we talked a little bit about some of those numbers yesterday, but it can seem counterintuitive, particularly when we're talking about population decline, which Marty mentioned earlier, and while we're at the same time experiencing this incredible demand for housing. But it's exactly like you say, we need more housing just for the same number of people, and we also have these parallel issues of housing coming off of the year-round market for things like short-term rentals. So I appreciate the comments from the Marquette City Commissioners here. They keep good tabs on what's going on with the short-term rental market. They have, I think Marquette was one of the earlier pieces of local legislation or regulation around short-term rentals. So they're a good model for how to handle this locally. So thank you, guys. We have just a few more minutes left. I don't know that we have any more questions that we haven't answered yet, but I would just like to remind you that we will be having an open discussion at 11:30. Use the link in the chat. Luke and Kent, I don't know if you have anything else that you'd like to add before we adjourn for our break, but we really appreciate all of the information that you've shared with us today. I think, again, this is a really exciting time. There's a lot of opportunity for housing, and it's really important for everyone to be on top of the many different initiatives that are out there right now. So thank you for that.
I guess just wanted to quickly add, Sarah, that I know, all of you that are on here, you've got other stuff to do. You can't make housing advocacy your full-time job, but I think, I would just encourage you though to just find some simple ways to help with what Luke is working on, with what Marty's talking, about, with some of the legislation that's out there, both from the Housing Michigan Coalition and some other ideas that are out there. You don't have to be an expert on it. Kind of that's sort of why, Luke and his team and Marty and me and Sarah are here. It's like we're kind of steeped in it day to day, but it's good having that, just that those people reaching out, and every time that you've got an opportunity to see your legislator, letting them know how important this is, because that does add. It does add fuel to what we're trying to say, that not only is this important out there, but we need actual tools and actual dollars to get this done. And it's not just us saying it. People are out there saying it as well. So thank you.
Yeah, the term you hear sometimes in Lansing is we need real people saying this, which always kills me. I am not a real person because I am a professional advocate. So you all are real people. So I think it is important to hear that message of urgency. Maybe, if you can check in over the holidays or early January with your legislator, say, hey, Indiana's already spent all of their rescue plan dollars. What are we doing? We need so much for housing, and it takes years and years for these investments to become reality. So let's get started.
Great point.